In 2009, you had a great breakthrough at Cannes, winning the Ansattar with your film Dogtooth, a film which moved on to Stockholm and win the Golden Bronze Horse, the Bronze Horse. And then you had, well, the film was also nominated for an Academy Award. And this year you returned to Cannes in the main competition with this film that you just saw, The Lobster. But it's your first film in a foreign language, and with this world-spread star cast. What has changed in the universe of Yorgos Lanthimos during these 6 years?
Well, first of all, good work with this. It was very fast. I wish the crew was working as fast. So what changed? Well, I made 3 films in Greece, and they were made in a very particular way because that was the only way that they could be made. And after the 3rd film, I decided that I needed to make English language films because that was the only way to progress and evolve and be able to have more choices on certain things. So that was basically the big decision, and I decided to move to England and have London as my base and start developing English language projects. The rest just happened. It took a while for the transition, but eventually we made this film, and I'm happy that we were very free creatively to do the film that we wanted to make, and eventually it did happen.
Yeah. Some people fear that the foreign Lanthimos would come with this certain artistic compromise. I mean, moving on from original Greek to standardized English. But you don't really seem affected by the transition. The Lobster became one of the great talkies in Cannes, and it won the jury prize as well. I mean, how natural was it actually for you, I mean, to move on with a much bigger budget and in another language?
Well, it was quite straightforward because, well, first of all, the film wasn't that much bigger than the previous films, so that we were in a place that we would lose control and there were too many people involved, and I definitely tried to keep the creative control at the same level that we had it before, and I worked with people that allowed me to have that. And then we grew as much as it was appropriate and necessary in order to be able to make the film that we wanted to make, but to not have to compromise on anything, again, on the creative side, because it's still a very small film compared to industry standards, so there were many restrictions in how we could make the film, in the means that we had and in the choices that we had, but at least we still kept total creative control and freedom, and that was the most important thing to achieve in that kind of transition.
Okay. Dogtooth, I guess a lot of you in the audience have seen this as well. It's about a patriarch raising his overgrown children, isolated from the world. And the film was frequently perceived as a commentary on the Greek recession. The debt crisis started the same year. And it sort of contributed to a small wave of local films on a similar basis, which means compatriots turning their back against society. And I mean, how important is the very Greek origin and heritage for the way of making your films? I mean, whether it's The Lobster or Dogtooth.
Yeah, well, first of all, like exactly the way you said it with Dogtooth, you know, the crisis started the year that the film came out, so it wasn't like a prognosis or anything. It didn't have anything to do with that. It was just a coincidence, and it's also, you know, the fact that people want to see more things in a film that what's actually there, and that's absolutely fine. And that's why, you know, we make the films the way we make them, and we try to leave them open enough so people can start thinking about things and associating them with things. And if people see that film 10 years later or 15 years later, maybe they can associate different things with it. So obviously, you know, those kind of associations and thoughts are, you know, valid and interesting to make with a film or a filmmaker, but they were definitely not part of how we created that film or the next films or this film. Because, for instance, this film, if you didn't know that it was a Greek film, I do get asked a lot whether it still has to do something with Greece and the situation. And, you know, if you didn't know that a Greek filmmaker made that film, I'm sure that you wouldn't be able to make such an association.
Yeah, I meant more metaphorically. But I know that you were early interested in films, but I'm interested in learning more about your social background. How were you raised? I mean, do you come from a working class family or a middle class family? And did you adapt at school, or did you rebel against your parents?
I guess I came from quite normal middle class, lower middle class family. Yeah, there's nothing adventurous about my upbringing, I guess. So yeah, it's very boring.
So you didn't have any specific formative years where you decided to become an artist and to be a filmmaker?
No, nothing so romantic as that. Actually, it was quite the opposite, because the time that I grew up in Greece and when I was deciding what I'm going to do with my life, you couldn't even think of becoming a filmmaker. There wasn't such a thing. There weren't, you know, many Greek films being made. There wasn't an industry. I mean, there still isn't, but things have changed. But you know, especially at that time, it was like, you know, people would think you're crazy that you're going to become a filmmaker. They didn't know what it meant, really. So I tried to take the side way, and I convinced myself that I'm actually going to go to film school in order to be able to start making commercials, and it's connected with marketing, which sounded like a, you know, a proper thing to do. So you could have like a job and make a living, and through that I went to film school, and of course I fell in love with films and filmmakers, and saw a lot of stuff that I'd never even seen before, and started to realize what it really means. And I kept in the back of my head, although I did start to make commercials very young, so that goal was achieved. So I was able to make commercials very young and earn money. So later on, I was able to make my films, because the first film that we made, you know, we basically paid for it. I paid for it. My friends paid for it. Productions company that I did commercials with paid for it. So through that, we got into filmmaking, and that's how I got my technical experience as well, through commercials, because there isn't a great film school in Greece either, so there's not great education around film. So yeah, it was like trying to be this proper person that would have a job in marketing and earn a living, that, you know, slightly found his way into making films in a country that you're not supposed to do that if you're young and you're not financed by anyone. So the mentality was very much like, you know, what can we do? I mean, nobody gives us money to make films. We can't make films. So Kineta, my first film, was the first time that we actually said, you know, why don't we just get a camera? We don't need many things. We're quite experienced technically, and so we weren't worried about, oh, we don't have any lights, we don't have any sets, we can't design the film the way we want. and we just went ahead and made the film with friends that didn't get paid. They paid themselves for, I don't know, for their food and getting there, and that's how I made my first film, and subsequently the next two at least.
But if your debut Kinetta hadn't had the recognition internationally at Toronto and Berlin, I mean, would you have continued? I mean, you made some theater plays early on as well.
I think I would have, because I didn't even dream of. I mean, we were making this film, and I didn't even know if there were people that were gonna watch it, besides us, that we actually made the film, and a few of our friends. So having a film that all of a sudden travels around the world and is seen by many people, and some of them even liked it, and it was like something that we hadn't thought through, that far ahead. It was just we wanted to make a film, we wanted to make it the way we wanted to make it, and that's what we did. And we never thought. I mean, in Greece, we had to make the films. You have to take it day by day. I mean, we paid for the films, we paid for filming, and then we didn't know how we're going to get the money to finish the film. We didn't know how we're going to edit it, how we're going to make the prints. It went to a festival, and all of a sudden we're looking for money because we needed for the print to travel, or just pay for sound to put on the print, or our subtitles. So we hadn't even thought that far ahead. And it was the same with Dogtooth. It was the same. We didn't know how we were going to finish the film and send it off to Cannes, and there were all these crazy costs that we'd never heard of. You had to have press kits, and there had to be 1,000 press kits, and I went like, why do we need thousands of press kits? We barely had money to pay for the film that we shot the film on, and now we have to pay like, I don't know, 5,000 euros for press kits. But yeah, I mean, we never, and I think it's still kind of similar. Of course, the scale changes, but it's kind of similar. You're not making a film thinking, okay, I'm going to make a film and it's going to go to Cannes or Venice or whatever, and then it's going to be released all around the world. And you just concentrate on making the film, and the rest follows.
Yeah. Okay, so let's move on 10 years then. In The Lobster, Colin Farrell plays the only named character, David. He's a person who desperately searches for love, but all the time running the risk of loneliness. I mean, when did you first have the idea for that film, and how did you come up with it?
Yeah, what happens is, well, I've written my last 3 films with Lanthimos Philippou, who's also a very good friend of mine, and we just start. Dogtooth was our first screenplay that we wrote together, and since then we just start discussing. Every time we finish a film, we just start discussing what we're interested in doing next. So all the ideas come through our conversations and dialogue. We tell each other things that we observe around us, things that we're interested in, and then one of us picks something up and creates this little story or these characters, and then the other one continues, and this thing grows and becomes a story, or depending on the project, sometimes we just start writing scenes to see if there's something there that we're interested in, and then we make up a whole story about it. So I think The Lobster it started from the idea of what if people who became single had to go to a hotel to find someone. So it starts as simple as that, and then you realize that you have to build a whole world around it of what are exactly the rules, how you apply more pressure for the characters to be able to overcome their difficulties, and so you're able to reveal things about the world that they live in and the other characters, and so it's quite a long process of piecing it piece by piece together. So
yeah, but you mentioned singlehood. I mean, singlehood is not only prohibited in The Lobster, the marriage must rely on the same characteristics and features. I mean, how do you get these ideas? I mean, do you observe people in daily life, or I mean, do you think about like reflecting on future scenarios?
Well, I guess we observe people, but also ourselves. We have our own experiences as well, and we push things to extremes and see where we can get with all that, and how it can all create a total image of a world or a society or something like that. So yeah, it's just, you know, trying and tweaking the things that we all really know and experience and making them into something that will eventually be able to reveal much about the absurdity that we live in our everyday lives.
But your films throughout rely on hierarchies, often with one person commanding or instructing another person. In your previous films, it's often a man instructing a woman, but in The Lobster, mainly the opposite. Bisexual is not a possible category, no half numbers, and only marriage is accepted. Does that sum up your view of the world? Or, I mean, a world that gets more and more global, but at the same time, less tolerant?
Well, it certainly expresses the view on this world that we presented. As I said before, I think we push things to extremes, but it all comes from real things. You know, how many things in our lives are regimented, and there are so many rules you have to follow, and you can think of absurd situations in many different domains in our life that, you know, people that follow certain rules, they come across situations where there's like this gray line that nobody can figure out, you know, what you should do in that, you know, instance, because the rule says this thing, so you're either this or that, and, you know, the whole gray area, which might be even big, you know, it has no, you know, solution. So it's just about taking those things and enhancing them in order to present this world, which obviously differs in many things from our world, but at the same time, it's very, very close, I believe, to what we experience, apart from the animal thing.
Your films play out with very few emotional outbursts. Instead, these almost vacuous characters, which people also have compared with Robert Bresson's concept of actors as models. In The Lobster, you're working with very well-known actors, and your new models are some of the most characteristic and most recognized Hollywood stars. I mean, how did they react on the set?
It was wonderful, really. It was the most positive experience that I had in this film, because I was quite worried about working with all these people that I didn't really know that well, and I hadn't met but a couple of times, and we also didn't even have a lot of time to rehearse beforehand. So most of the actors came on set, and some of them came halfway filming. So they just had to tune in immediately in what it is that was happening. But I was very lucky with all those actors. It started early on from the casting process. I just thought of the people that I wanted to work with, and then I tried to figure out how they would fit into our screenplay, our universe, our film. I only worked with people that knew my work and appreciated my previous work. So I was also lucky to have a work to show to them. So that, in conjunction with the screenplay, which was quite particular, they knew what to expect. So they knew if they wanted to get into this situation or not. And fortunately, most of them did. And they're very talented, very committed, very hardworking. They have a great instinct, all of them, and it just happened to work perfectly because there wasn't even the slightest glitch while filming with the actors. It was really a great experience, and I was surprised. I was, every day I was going like, nothing happened with any of the actors today. That's strange. And some of the times we're working in difficult conditions. We spent 3 weeks outside in the forest. Again, we were very lucky because we were in Ireland filming for 3 weeks, and it rained twice, which was like a miracle. And the Irish crew were going around, what the hell is going on? And so we were, but we were still outside in the forest, and people were outside in the mud, and they were just, they were great about it, and not even once anyone made it difficult.
That's impressive. So many different characters from so many different countries. There's a very disturbing tone in your films, an unpredictable shift from the seemingly harmless to the deeply threatening. I think it was John C. Reilly playing the lisp in the film. He talked at a press conference in Cannes about an oppressive quality, a constant feeling that something terrible is going to happen. Is that your aim, or, how do you achieve that tension?
Yeah, I'm never entirely sure. Hope it doesn't come out like that in the end. But yeah, while you do have something in mind, but then you have so many different elements to tune and play with and balance out. So you have a screenplay and you think you know what you're doing, and then you choose the place where you're going to make the film, and you choose the actors, and they all have different qualities than what you had in your head, and so it's a matter of taking all these different qualities and nuances and putting them together and trying them out, and in the various steps of the process, from filming to editing to mixing or whatever, you just try and balance all these things out. And I guess what we're mostly interested in is that balance with different kind of tones, and especially in this film, because it's the first time I actually use music as a soundtrack or voiceover. So it's always a matter of combining all these different layers of different elements that have a quite different tone to each other, and then creating this other tone by all of these things. So I'm not sure if the idea is about this oppressive world, obviously, so that was important. But the details were also very important. When a scene becomes funny or ridiculous or threatening or violent, and going from the one to the other instantly, and without allowing the time to get used to going from one to the other, I think that creates an interesting experience for someone who watches a film, because he's in a place where, I don't know, he sees something amusing and funny and ridiculous, and all of a sudden he's brought into a very dark or violent place, and carrying all that sentiment from previously with him, it just complicates things, and I guess that steers things up in people, hopefully.
Speaking about voiceover, for me that there's a key scene halfway through the film, a sort of turning point. It concerns the voiceover, because so far it hasn't been performed. It's been performed without engagement, and just slightly ironic, a touch of Kubrick's Berlin almost. And then suddenly the voiceover turns into an I person it reveals itself as the short-sighted woman played by Rachel Weisz. The first time we see her, she says, "It was the first time I saw him, David, her love-to-be." It's a very fine, overwhelming moment in the film. Do you agree that it's sort of like a turning point in the film?
Well, I guess it is, because you for the first time you get to see or know a person that's been hiding all along and is going to play a vital role in the life and course of the main character. So yes, obviously from that side of things, it is quite a turning point.
Yeah, before we let the audience in, I wanted to ask you about your next film. It's called The Favorite.
Probably. Yeah, maybe.
Can you say something about it?
I'm going to be very vague about this.
It's Rachel Weisz again and Olivia Colman?
Probably. Maybe.
But you won't write it yourself. It's an adaptation.
It's not an adaptation. Well, first of all, it's inspired by the real Queen Anne. So it's about these three women in the court of Queen Anne, 1700s. So it is taken from a real story, and of course it's now made into something quite different. So there was a screenplay originally, but I've been developing that project for 5 years with another writer. So we completely rewrote the screenplay. So it's again our project, but I'm not entirely sure if that's going to be the next one and who's going to be in it. It depends from a lot of things, so that's why I'm being vague.
Okay. Sounds interesting. Do we have any questions from the audience? There must have been tons of them after seeing The Lobster. Ooh. Yes?
Yeah, I'm not gonna fall for that. No, it would be so superficial, me having been here twice for 2 days and pretend like I've captured the essence of Swedish people. So I wouldn't even dare.
Yes, over there.
If you end up single and facing loneliness, which animal would you like?
That's an easy one because I've been asked that many times. I would become an eagle or some kind of big bird to fly.
Okay. So, but would you be in the hotel or with the loners in the woods?
As an eagle in the hotel, I think it would be very restrictive.
Yeah, but if you could choose between the hotel and the...
Oh, if I would become a loner? Maybe. I was never given that choice.
Okay.
Yeah, better a loner than a...
Yes, over there. Yeah, you.
Could you talk a little bit about why you chose this acting style on the character?
Yeah. Well, I didn't really choose an acting style. It all happened very organically. So obviously, I have a certain kind of tendency or taste. I create a certain kind of atmosphere on set, which is not very conscious. The text also has a very particular voice, I think, and the actors understand that. And even if they don't, I think most of the times when you don't do it right, it's kind of obvious, it's evident. So really, the actors brought, most of it in what we were doing, and I guess they did have an idea of my previous work, and that influenced things as well. But honestly, I try to stay away from explaining to actors what our style is. I hope, we allow, the text and what we're doing mesh with their, personality and presence, and I welcome that, and I allow it to change the characters accordingly. And we don't even, in the screenplay, we don't even describe the characters so much, or their age sometimes. So depending on, I'm freer to choose, the actors that I like and I think would fit in the world that we're creating. So from the screenplay, it might change when we actually choose the actor. And they bring, a lot of stuff, like, because of the way they are and their sensibilities and all those sorts of things. So for what I try to do is just create an atmosphere that allows them to be free to discover the tone of the film and the scenes.
I think we have time for one final question. Yes, over there.
If you were David, would you blind yourself for love?
If I was David, whether I'd blind myself for love. I don't know. Very difficult questions for the first time. So Swedish people make difficult questions, ask difficult questions. I really don't know. I've never put myself in that position.
But do you think that love...
I wouldn't. I would go away.
But do you think that love has to be blind to be functional?
No, I don't have such beliefs. I don't know. I'm just wondering about things. That's why I made this film. I'm just trying to find an answer as the rest of the people, whether there is love, and how do you find it, and how do you realize it, and what you're prepared to do for it, as was the question. So yeah, I don't have the answers to all those things. I just have a lot of questions.
It's a pity. So I guess it's time for the prize ceremony.
Forgot about the prize.
Festival director Git Chanis will read the motivation. But first, we will show a trailer of
okay, that's embarrassing.
Lanthimos' body of work.
Ο αδερφός σας πέθανε. Ένα πλάσμα σαν αυτό που εισέβαλε σήμερα στον κήπο τον διαμέλισε.
Git.
Some of the privilege you have to organizing a film festival is it to be able to celebrate the talents and the one who have the courage enough to challenge the film art. And in our word, it is the visionary who is the brave ones. And the motivation is Yorgos Lanthimos is a master of discovering the deeper truth about mankind, give us the perspective that is both challenging and headstrong. His film offered the audience an unpredictable ride from the seamlessly harmless to the deeply disturbing. A cinematic trip that forces us to discover an inconvenient reflection of our own behavior, logic, and desires. And yet, we cannot stop looking, identifying, and yes, very oddly smiling. This is the mark of a true, unique visionary. Thank you very much, Yorgos Lanthimos, for giving us this.
Thank you.
Here's the verse.
Thank you very much. Exactly as heavy as I remembered it. Well, thank you very much. Obviously, it's extremely humbling to get one of these and for the second time, and especially this one, if you think of the people that have gotten it before me, it's definitely a great honor, so thank you very much for that. Also, happy birthday. It's Kid's birthday. So yeah, I mean, I guess you've heard a lot of things about my work, so you're kind of bored. But what I wanted to say is that what's very important for me when I receive something like this, which is for a body of work, that especially in the first years and the first 3 films that we made in Greece, if all those people and friends around me hadn't supported me in that way, very selflessly and generously, just out of the love of making films, just working for no money or putting their own money in order to make films, that kind of mentality is hard to find. So I wouldn't be able to have made those films without all of those people. So I'm really grateful to them as well. And yeah, thank you for making our films feel so loved and acknowledged. And yeah, that's it. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks to you. Thanks to you, Yorgos Lanthimos, and thanks to you in the audience. Enjoy the rest of the festival.